also, Sophie, we know Dirk has been very central to the South African case to the ICJ. So talk to us about your reaction from today's judgment.
Well, we got information earlier on that the court was going to be firm so that there are no challenges in future. And therefore, indeed, it did happen, as I pointed out, that Israel officials had indicated that they expect a decision to be in favor of South Africa. I posted this earlier on social media after getting that information, and indeed it did happen. And I think now what is critical, I think Sherwin, going back to what Dr. Naledi Pandor said about the ICC, the International Criminal Court. We know that South Africa in December started with the International Criminal Court. It looks like the minister is not that happy about the chief prosecutor at the ICC in terms of his statement, and I think him saying that you can't equate Israel military might and the nation that is defending itself, that is Palestine. What do you think about that statement?
Even if you are fighting for freedom, right? And I mean, South Africa has a very good understanding of this, given the entities like Umkhonto Sizwe, for example, right? Nelson Mandela himself was a commander of Umkhonto Sizwe and was on a terrorism list in the United States, I believe, Sophie, until something like 2008. What ICC prosecutor Khan has been very clear on, right? Because there's another side to the minister's comments. The United States, for example, has said he's creating a false equivalency in between the actions of Hamas, which US views as a terrorist group, and the actions of the leaders of a democratically elected state of Israel, like the prime minister and his defense minister. And so the prosecutor, Sophie, has been very clear that violations of international law are not based on whether you are elected democratically or whether you are fighting for your freedom. The violations against civilians, this is what the court was created for. The ICC, based on the Rome Statute, is about the victims. It's about the victim-centric approach, and that's what he's very clear of. So whether you're a state imposing yourself or violating the rights of civilians, they are the victims. Whether you are Hamas, a militant, terrorist, freedom fighter, if you are impugning the dignity, the rights of civilians, international law applies universally to both entities. So there will be some pushback against what the minister is imputing in a sense that somehow if you fight for your freedom, you are justifiable in attacking civilians. Remember, there were many civilians attacked in Israel on October 7th, and what the ICC is doing is saying whether you break the law as a democratic state or as a militant terrorist / whatever group you want to call Hamas, the law will apply equally to both.
And then also my observation in terms of the ruling, very firm on issue of the release of the hostages without any condition. I think we tend to forget that you still have people who are in captivity. Your reading of that, do you think Hamas, after this victory of South Africa, they will listen to what the court has said in terms of releasing the hostages? Because we know that they were willing to engage in negotiations with Israel, but Israel was putting up difficult measures as we speak, that discussions around release of hostages and perhaps cessation of hostilities, it's not going anywhere.
I think the difficulty, and it would be great if we can get a legal expert to confirm this, but Hamas is not a party to the ICJ process. The ICJ here is talking about its jurisdiction in the context of the Genocide Convention. Israel is a party to the Genocide Convention. South Africa is a party to the Genocide Convention. The court is now adjudicating on having established a dispute between these two parties to the convention. Hamas, as a non-state party, as a militant group, is not party to the jurisdiction of this court. And I think what the court is doing here is to say, hey, although we do not have jurisdiction, we believe that the hostages should be released. They did that in their first order in January. They've affirmed it multiple times, as they did earlier today. But actually, actually Hamas is not party to these processes. They are party to the processes that are underway in the other Hague-based court, which is the International Criminal Court, under the purview of the prosecutor Karim Khan. So there might be some accountability there in terms of what Hamas has done at the ICC, but in terms of what the ICJ can order here, they cannot order Hamas to do anything because Hamas is not a party to the Genocide Convention. And that's kind of the platform or the basis for the deliberations we are seeing in the ICJ, multiple hearings, multiple applications for provisional measures. But Hamas is not an entity, it's not a state's party that is subject to the UN Charter and therefore the prescripts of the ICJ. So it's a little bit technical, Sophie, it's a little bit more complicated, even though the court is pronouncing itself and saying release the hostages. In fact, they said they have grave concern for the hostages, deeply troubling that hostages remain in captivity. But as you understand, there is a parallel process that is underway, led under the auspices of the United States, Qatar and Egypt. Those ceasefire negotiations, I think, where the game is at, whether you're going to see a ceasefire here or not, outside of the ICJ process, I would still keep a close eye. I understand, I just saw an alert that these ceasefire negotiations are going to resume shortly. And that, I think, is where the hostages and their release stands a better chance than perhaps the ICJ.
I think Sherwin summed it up very nicely in the beginning of this interview, Sophie, by asking, will Israel indeed actually abide by this binding ruling? So, Sophie, your observation, 1 month for the report back. What do you think we should expect?
Defiance from Israel, that's all what I can say, supported by its allies, the United States of America, but I think most of the European Union member states are going to pull back. And I foresee a situation where more countries are going to recognize Palestine. And secondly, in relation to the talks that are being facilitated by Qatar, we might get something before end of next week.
That is SABC News international editor Sophie Mokoena alongside our New York correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease.